came to America to become a prosecutor?
Well, actually, I came. My parents had a condo here in the early '80s in South Florida, and we used to come all the time. And so my father left school at 14, and my mother left school at 16. So my father was an entrepreneur, didn't come from a wealthy family, and he was a big believer in the American dream. Work hard, and go out there and earn money so you could put food on the table for your family. And in 1987, he made it a permanent move. So he's been gone almost 9 years now, but so I think this is where I get my entrepreneurial spirit from.
Okay. And you came to America and you started was it your dream to become a lawyer?
Actually, I'll be honest with you, it was not. Um,
How did you end up becoming a prosecutor?
okay, so in terms of becoming a lawyer, so like I said, my father was not an educated man and he built businesses. Some worked, some didn't. Some made lots of money and some he lost money on. And he had really emphasized to me that it was important to have a profession, like
Mhm.
being a lawyer or an accountant or whatever, right? Where you were, because he felt that I would always be able to make a living.
Right.
And so when I was almost done with college, I figured if I was gonna do any profession, it would probably be the law. Um, and I decided to go. I figured if I didn't go to law school when I was done with college, I probably wasn't going to go at all. So
Oh,
I ended up, because so when I was living in England, I was in college, but I was studying to be, we call it a chartered surveyor. You guys call it real estate appraisers here. So I was trying to get into the real estate business. But again, I wanted to become licensed to do something so I could charge for services because my dad said if you know, n- not just the education, but the ability to charge for your time. So um, I looked into doing it here, but then I decided, I'm just better off to go to law school. So that's what I did. And to be honest with you, I really didn't, I wasn't a particularly good law student. I finished in the top half of the class, but I wasn't passionate about the law. I wasn't a great legal scholar. But then I had an opportunity. I figured I should get some trial experience. So I had an opportunity to intern with the state attorney's office. And I knew 5 minutes into my first real trial that that's where I was supposed to be.
okay.
So they ended up hiring me. The long and short of it is I was supposed to intern um, for about 3 months, which would have been my very first semester of my third year. Over the summer, I was supposed to clerk for a personal injury law firm that I'd been clerking for most of my second year, and I was there for a whole week over the summer, and I got into a big argument with one of the partners, and they fired me. So,
Okay.
um, funny how the universe works. And so here's what happened. I called my professor you know, who was running the internship that was supposed to start in September, and here we are in the middle of June. And I said to him, "Can I start my internship a little bit early?" And he said, "Well, when do you want to start?" I said, "How does Monday sound?" So instead of going from, say, September through December, I started in June and went all the way through to January. So instead of having a 3 month internship, I had almost a 7 month internship. And I got to try a dozen. I did 12 trials as a second year law student, which had never been done before. I also did an appellate argument that had never done before. I mean, I basically set the standard for interns. And, so even today, my law professor, who I'm still in contact with 30 plus years later, tells everybody I was the best intern they ever had. But the long and short of it was they ended up hiring me. And that's how I ended up at the state attorney's office. So I think if I had interned for only 3 months, I wouldn't have got the experience and the exposure. See, that's the universe at work, right? What looked like a disaster, right? Sometimes people don't realize that when failure comes along, it's it's the it's the prelude to success. See, if I'd interned all summer for that big PI firm, right, which I absolutely hated doing, but I wanted something nice on my resume. Um,
Okay. I
so
thought it was because you were passionate about it.
well, I ended up becoming passionate about it, but I didn't know. The only reason I was doing the internship was I figured I should get some trial experience.
Right.
I didn't realize when I actually started to do real trials that I was really good at it.
Mhm.
Not just really good, like I was wiping the floor with private defense lawyers. I was kicking their ass all over the courtroom, even the judge couldn't believe what I was doing. I couldn't believe what I was doing. Um, and so I spent 5 years there. I tried 200 jury trials in 5 years. I guarantee that's never been done either. I was a machine, and I was really good at trying cases, and I was passionate about it, and I was passionate about helping people, so it
Then
stood me
why
in
did
good.
you leave it?
What's that?
Why did you leave it?
I was burned out. I was burned out, and that really got me on my journey to trying to figure the rest of my life out, because after I left, um, I think my life went south for many years. I left in 1999. I don't think I really got my act together, until 2015. Really took me 16 years of trying to figure out my life. I got married and divorced. I went broke. I mean, it was a complete disaster. It's interesting. Yesterday was my 59th birthday, and the day before that was my second wedding anniversary. So this is my second marriage. My wife is my law partner, and I couldn't have done any of this without her. So she's quite brilliant in many ways. So when I was 34, I got married for the first time, and when I was 35, I got divorced for the first time. So I had a very short marriage. After I left the state attorney's office, I did some private defense work, and I made a lot more money. I mean, I would say I made 7 or 8 times more money. The first 2 years I was out of law school, I lived at home with my parents. I didn't have government lawyers don't make that much money, but I was very passionate about helping people. And the last year and a half that I was at the state attorney's office, when I was in a felony trial unit, and I was trying first degree felonies, second degree felonies. And so these were either violent crimes or murder cases, and I was in trial. I was literally in trial every single day for a year and a half straight. And it just completely burned me out. And instead of taking a little time off, because they offered me actually a leadership position in the office where I wouldn't have been trying cases, and I should have taken it, but I didn't. I sort of went for the almighty dollar, and that was a mistake because I was miserable doing it, even though I was making a lot more money and had all these material possessions and all that other fun stuff. But deep down, I was miserable. I wasn't satisfied, and I'm sure that contributed to, the disastrous 1 year marriage I had. So after I got divorced, I actually moved to Washington D.C. for a year. I worked on a presidential campaign for a whole year. Um, and ended up becoming part of the candidate's legal team. And I spent the last 2 months every weekend with either the presidential candidate or the vice presidential candidate. I also went back to school for a year and I got a master's in law, which is something I'd really wanted to do for a long time. I was passionate about getting a higher degree. It's only about 10% of lawyers go back and get that extra year, and I wanted
Right.
to get it. But the candidate I worked for didn't win, and so I had to come back home. And I tried everything I could to make a living without practicing law, but um, I was unable to make a living without practicing law. So I did practice some law, but I was pretty miserable. Um,
Was
and
it
then
the same specialty?
I was doing some criminal defense work. I also worked for, I was also helping my family with a family business, which I didn't enjoy doing. I was very unstimulated, and I think that what do they say? Don't go into business with family or friends. It's a very quick way to ruin a relationship. So so I did that, and in 2010, I took what I had left from the '08 crash, and I ran to California. I ran to California for 3 years. I had a cousin who lived out there, and I figured, I don't know, maybe I'll find my fortune in California. And I basically spent 3 years, Sheeta, tripping the light fantastic. I did all the things that the material man likes to do.
Mhm.
So I worked out, I I dated beautiful women, and I actually took the California bar twice. So I had a good friend of mine, and he had been a public defender in Miami-Dade when I was a prosecutor in Palm Beach, and he had also gone out there and said to me, "I'm going to take the California bar. It's my third time taking it. Why don't you study for it? And if you pass it, we can go and open up a criminal defense firm here in Southern California, and we'll clean up. We'll make a fortune." So I said, "Okay, what the hell?" Right? I studied for the California bar, and he passed, and I failed. So I studied a second time, and I failed it again. So after 3 years of basically blowing through all my money and not making a living and really accomplishing nothing of any significance, I had to come home. I was broke. I spent another 6 weeks studying here in Florida. So I here's the irony. I sat down in the local library here in on Spanish River Boulevard, which ultimately about a year and a half later would be the place I would start my own law firm, but I didn't know that at the time. So I sat down, I studied for the bar exam again. I flew out to California, I took the exam, and I failed it a third time. I got within a percentage point, but I failed it for the third time. So here I was flat broke. I spent a whole year studying for this exam, couldn't pass it. And when I got hired by the state attorney's office, for the first month out of law school, I I would work during the day and go to school class at night. And then I took 3 weeks off, crammed, and went right back to school. I took the bar exam on a Thursday and was Monday morning. I was back at work. And and then about 2 months later, I found out I'd passed. So I really didn't study. I wouldn't say I didn't study much. I just studied for a very brief period of time, but very, very hard. And I just kept saying, wow, maybe I'm not supposed to be in California. Maybe I'm supposed to be in Florida. And then I met somebody that completely and utterly changed the direction of my life. So um, one morning I picked up the phone. I called a good friend of mine that I went to law school with because I was at home doing absolutely nothing. I had nothing going on, either personally or professionally. And I spoke to my good friend Richard. I said, hey, Richard, what's going on? What are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm busy with I have a traffic ticket practice, I'm making a living, yada, yada, yada. He says, oh, by the way, this is breakfast meeting going on next week. There's a guy presenting. His name is R. John Robbins, and he runs this company that teaches lawyers about the business side of practice and law, which is not something they teach any lawyer or any law student anywhere in the country, in any law school. They don't teach us that. They teach us barely enough black letter law so we can pass the bar exam and maybe be a little bit dangerous. That's it. We really know very little when I look back at it, right? And I said, okay, well, when is it? He said, well, it's next Wednesday. It's at 7:30 in the morning. And I said, well, that's down in Coral Gables. I live in Boca. I'd have to get up at 4 in the morning to go see this guy speak. I'm not doing it. I'm not getting up at 4 in the morning. And I left it at that. But for like 3 days, I had this nagging feeling that I needed to go. It was in the pit of my stomach, and I just felt like I needed to go. So I did. And I watched this guy, Arjun Robbins, speak to this group of 20 lawyers about the business side of being a lawyer, how to be an entrepreneurial lawyer. And that really resonated with me because I'd seen my dad, with no education, and my mom with no education, build businesses, be entrepreneurs. And after I saw him speak, of course, the lawyers in the room didn't get it because most lawyers are assholes anyway, which is why people don't like us because we're obnoxious, right? Because we think we know everything and we don't know. It's a combination of things. The profession tends to attract people who want to get love from their clients and be told how brilliant they are. And the other half of the people that come in, you just want to prove how smart they are, right? And they lose sight of what we're really here for, which is to serve and to take care of people and help them to solve what is not a legal problem. It's a personal problem. Now, does that mean that every lawyer you know, is this? No, but it's a stereotype that the legal profession has unfortunately been cloaked with because there's so many lawyers out there who are they just don't get it. It's as simple as that. It's not a misconception. My father used to tell me he hated all the lawyers except for me. So, and here's why that's relevant. Not because I'm trying to bash the legal profession, but here's why it's relevant. So I saw him speak. I begged him for a job, and he hired me after a couple of interviews. And I spent a whole year learning about the business side of practice and law. But here's what I did not realize when he first hired me. What How to Manage really is at the very core is a personal growth company for lawyers.
Okay.
And what they teach, other than obviously the business aspect of running a business, law firm, is the financial growth has to be preceded by personal growth. Okay, that's why most lawyers are not liked. It's why they're obnoxious and rude. It's because they've never had any personal growth. They're so busy trying to tell everybody how smart they are and get love from their clients, which is not what we're supposed to be doing, they forget what they're really there for. They lose sight of it. And so after a year there of learning about the business of practicing law and really working on myself, there was two things I came to realize. Number one, that I had failed to take 100% responsibility for both my personal life and my business life. The reason I was broke is because I didn't do anything to change that. Okay, the reason I didn't have anybody special in my life is because I was intentionally spending time with people where there was never going to be, that sort of lifelong connection, which I have now with my wife. The other thing that I realized was that if I was going to be happy practicing law, I had to find a group of people that I could help. So I had to reclaim that passion that I had, you know, 15 or 16 years earlier when I'd been a prosecutor, where I've always felt like I was helping people, even though I wasn't getting paid a whole lot for it. So when I tell you, see, this is what when I tell you that the legal profession, a lot of lawyers lose sight of the fact that we're here to serve. And that doesn't mean say you shouldn't get paid and paid well. But at the end of the day, we're here to serve and help people to solve their problems, their personal problems. We as lawyers look at it as a legal problem, but it's not, right? The client doesn't look at it as a breach of contract. They look at it as the thing that's causing them to be unable to sleep. It's what they're worried about. It's what's causing tension in the home and in the family. It's a very much a personal problem. We look at it as a legal problem, and then we lose sight of the fact that there's a human being on the other side of this thing. It's not just a file on the desk. And so that sometimes is my frustration with the legal profession. And that's why lawyers are not liked. They're just not, right? I mean, that's so. I realized when I realized these things, I said, okay, I'm going to go open up my own law firm, and the group of people that I'm going to help are people that have drug and alcohol issues, right? Because I had close family members and friends who had those issues, and there was not a single lawyer out there really trying to help them. There were other lawyers dabbling in it. There was a divorce lawyer who was dabbling in it. There was another guy who sued nursing homes. He was dabbling in it. I said, when there's no dabbling, I'm not going to dabble in this. I'm going to go 100% all in to help these people. And I read about a law here in Florida, which we still use to this day, that can help families get the authority to start making decisions to save their loved ones. Because when somebody has a disease, which is what a behavioral health is, they can't make that decision. Their brain has been kidnapped. They're not capable of making the decision to save themselves. They don't even acknowledge or realize there is a problem. So how can we expect them to save themselves? So somebody else has to do that. So what we do, even today, is about getting families the control of what is typically an out of control situation so they can make the decision to save their loved one. Because if they don't, one of two things is going to happen. One, this person will end up dead. And I'm going to be blunt here because every year we get that call, or we call a family that didn't hire us, and 6 months later we found out they lost their loved one. Or the state will step in and do it for you, either through the criminal system or the mental health system. And I know that from a personal perspective because 11 months after I opened up my own law firm, 2 days, I lost my dad. And 2 days after I said goodbye to him, I had a family member who was sucked into Florida's mental health system. So I know what this feels like from a very personal perspective. And I had some very close friends. My best friend had a sibling who had a substance use disorder. He had a brother-in-law that took his life because of a substance use disorder. And he had a sister-in-law who overdosed and died because of a substance use disorder. So when I tell people I know what this feels like, I know what this feels like, which is why I built an entire law firm doing this thing and only this thing. So, I mentioned the library, Sheeta. So what I did was when I said I'm going to open up my own law firm, is I went back to that library where I had studied for and failed the California bar, and I sat down they had a little cafeteria that had pretty cheap, reasonably good coffee, and they also had free Wi-Fi. And I said, okay, I'm going to start my law firm right here. And I opened up my laptop. I created a spreadsheet of everybody I knew that I could think of. I went through my phone, my laptop, anybody that I could think of or find, I put into the spreadsheet. You got to remember, I hadn't lived in Florida for 3 years. I hadn't practiced law in close to 5. People didn't even know I was here. And I just started calling people. We used to call it smiling and dialing. And I just called people and I said, come meet me for coffee, come have lunch with me, come talk to me, come meet with me. And I just would talk to anybody and everybody that would listen to me. I also got very, very cheap business cards made at Vistaprint, and I ran around to treatment centers and handed out my business card and said, I'm here to help. And it took 14 months before anybody called me with the with the kind of cases I was looking to get. So in the meantime, I took criminal cases. I took family law cases that I co-counseled with a friend from law school. The first case I had was a student athlete here in Florida who got himself in hot water with a female student. He was potentially going to lose a scholarship, and they were talking about prosecuting him criminally. So that was my first case. And about a year in, I had enough money to get myself out of the library and get a small office, which ironically we still have today. We don't use it much because we're virtual at this point. But my wife was there this morning, funny enough, meeting with a client. Um, and so in 2017, I met my now wife at a networking event. And for the next 6 years, 7 years, we worked together and we did everything: sales, marketing. We met with the clients. We drafted the pleadings. We ran to court. We did all of it, all of it. It's only been the last almost 3 years now that we've had staff. And we're now a team of, I think there's 15 of us now. Um,
Mm. Let me ask you this, Mark. What working in the library taught you that a real office would never do?
Look, it all sort of, it also, it's interesting, and I'm going to digress for a second. When it comes to a business, you have to continually work on it. If you want the business to evolve, you have to evolve as a leader, as a partner in the business, as an owner. And so I'm constantly trying to evolve. It was interesting, I was at dinner with my wife 2 nights ago because it was our second anniversary. And she basically said to me, you've gotten a little fat and happy. She didn't mean that literally, although that may be some truth to that, but she meant that figuratively speaking, right? I'd gotten a little bit lazy. Now, from the outside, people would say, lazy, he doesn't stop running. She was saying, look, there's things you used to do, you don't do them anymore. And so I think what the being in the library taught me was, in order to get out of the library, you have to you have to take massive action. And there's going to be times when you feel like giving up. But you see, I was broke, so I had, plus I lost my dad. I had to take care of my mother. I mean, try finding $25,000 to pay for a funeral when you don't have it. Right? Because I not only did I have to bury my father, I had to pay for my mother's plot too, because I had to buy 2 plots so that when she passed, she could lay next to him. So, these were crazy times for me, but I wasn't going to give up. I didn't know I had that fight in me until I was broke. But, I've also spent, probably close to half my life in the martial arts world, so I had to pick myself up, put on my big boy pants, take responsibility, and own it, and just keep grinding and fighting and pushing and refusing to be denied. So, I just kept pushing. I mean, since I came along, there've been a couple of other law firms who've come along, one of which has been stealing stuff off my website and copying what we do. I mean, what am I going to do? Should I tell them they can't? I should have sent them an email saying you can't feed your family. No, there's literally thousands of families out there that need help. So I just say, okay, I do what I do. I try to do it better than anybody else, but there's a lot of people that need me, and there's a lot of people that need them and everybody else. So it takes a village. So I don't lose sleep over it. I just move forward. But there's always going to be these challenges, but you just have to say, I simply refuse to stay down. I'm not going to be a victim and cry about it, because I'm 59 years of age and I'm responsible not just for putting food on my table, but now I have 15 other people that work for us. And I'm responsible for making sure they have food on their table so they can take care of their families. Because if I'm broke, what good am I to any client? How can a lawyer be any good to a client if he's sitting there or she's sitting there thinking, how do I pay my rent? You're no good. That's why lawyers need to understand this is a business. And by building a great business, which doesn't necessarily mean you make a lot of money, it just means it functions properly, then you can do a better job for your clients and help them to solve their problems. And that's one of the things that I learned when I was working for R. John Robbins. And here's the irony of it. You want to hear the irony of it? 2 years ago, right before my wife and I were going to get married, we got a book in the mail that was sent to us by somebody from How to Manage a Small Law Firm. And after reading it, we realized while we were doing well, we could do a whole lot better. And we ended up rejoining as members. So we now are members of How to Manage. I don't work there, I'm a client. And they helped us the last 2 years to restructure the business. Last year, we had our our best year ever. We helped more people than ever before. And it was an extraordinary year. And so I'm blessed, but I also know I'm a work in progress, both personally and professionally. And I continue to work on myself. And my wife is amazing. And when I slack off a little bit, because we all have those moments, she's there to, to give me a little nudge and say, okay, time to step back up to the plate. She's my accountability partner. So I'm a lucky guy. I married right the second time around, but I married probably the second time around for much different reasons than I did the first time, when I was very immature and hadn't learned any lessons yet.
Lovely. What do you think the difference between listening and leading with authority is?
Oh God, so you're talking about being a boss? It's funny you should say that.
Whatever your interpretation of that
Here's
is.
my interpretation of that.
Sure.
So I think one of the skills I've had to learn when it comes to being, a leader, running a business, is there's a fine line when you're dealing with staff. There's a fine line between patting somebody on the back and, giving them a nudge and telling them, that they dropped the ball, or they can do better, right? And I've had to learn that, because people do make mistakes, and I'm certainly one of them, right? And sometimes my staff make mistakes. And so I think that there's a time when you say, okay, this person isn't a good fit for our business, and they are a good fit. So why don't we give them the encouragement and give them the tools to be successful? Because at the end of the day, if we hire the wrong person, that's on us. If we hire the right person, but they're unsuccessful, again, that's on us. Maybe we did a lousy job training them or onboarding them or supporting them. And so learning to be a boss has been an interesting journey for me. Um, the other thing that I've really struggled with and is letting go. And what I mean by that is, there's only 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. I can only work so much, and I have to decide: Am I going to work in the business, right, meeting with clients, drafting pleadings, running to court, or am I going to work on the business, which means spending time marketing the business and sales and all of that fun stuff. And you, if you only have that much amount of time, you got to figure out how you're going to do it, right? Because if I spend a half a day in the courthouse with a client, the other half of the day, if I've got any energy left, is going to be spent trying to market the business. Whereas if I have somebody else who does all the running to court for me, I can spend all day long marketing the business, which means I can grow it. And so letting go of that part of the business, in other words, allowing other lawyers to come work with us and trusting them to do a great job for the client, has been, I would say, it's been challenging for me. Ironically, we hired two amazing associates, both of whom I think are much better lawyers than me. They don't quite have my experience. So when issues come up in the courtroom or how to handle a case, they call me or they call my wife, because there's no substitute for experience. And sometimes if I don't know the answer to something, I can usually figure it out. And that means tapping into my experience. So I learn something every day about being the owner of a business.
Thank you for sharing that.